Hey guys, what's going on? Cyberfury here. Welcome to the World Touring Car 800 at Monza this week for the GT7 weekly challenge. This video is going to be similar to the last guide I did a few weeks ago for that challenge around Tokyo Expressway. However, I'm going to have timestamps down below if you want to take a look at the most relevant section to you. There's going to be no pit stop strategies for both normal and hard, as well as a one pit stop strategy for hard. As always, a little bit of a disclaimer where this might not be the most efficient car for this challenge, however, this was the one that I was able to make it work in. Without further ado, let's take a look at our car this week. This is the Honda NSX GT500 08 with a couple of mods here. I have all of the parts that were installed on the car listed here, as well as you can see from the overlay how I had things adjusted. Pretty much the only things you'll need here are the hard tires, the racing muffler, and the racing slotted disc brakes. Other than that, it's essentially just stock. For this first race, I wanted to try a no pit stop challenge. This car is incredibly efficient when it comes to fuel usage around tracks, especially when you have it in the upper mappings for fuel usage 4, 5, and 6. And I know from using this car in other races that you can get quite a few laps out of a lot of tracks. My strategy for this race was to change the fuel mapping to level 4, which should give us the most amount of power and the most amount of laps without a compromise really between the two. However, as I came to learn, it posed a problem later on in the race, which I'll show you when we get there. And I don't recommend setting it to 4 right away for people that might be a little bit newer to racing or newer to Gran Turismo in general. My recommendation would be to set it to 5 or 6 for the first 1 or 2 laps and then set it to 4 thereafter, and you'll see why that's the case in a little bit. Before we get there though, I do want to showcase my best lap from this race, which happened to be on lap 8. And starting off into T1, we're going to want to brake at the 100 board or just after. Since we're on a little bit of a higher fuel mapping, you're going to be going a little bit slower than you would be otherwise, but targeting the 100 board for the first turn into the chicane is recommended from my point of view. And then after that, we have this long right-hander, which essentially is a straight. If you're unfamiliar with Monza, it's basically a collection of straights broken up by either a chicane or some kind of curve. If you're not turning or braking for a turn, you should probably be full throttle. Coming into the second chicane, you're going to want to brake at the 100 board again, throw it down into second gear, smoothly transition through the chicane, and then hammer on out the other side. Around the next 2 right-handers, you're going to want to brake at 50 boards, down to third gear, kind of coast around a little bit, and once you're past the apex, you're going to want to hammer on again. After the second right-hander, you're going to be led here, which is a slight left, but basically treat this as a straight as you would any other straight. Full throttle all the way until you hit the, you guessed it, 100 board here, down to third gear. You're going to want to keep it really tight to the curbs, as tight as you can without being on top of them. And you're going to want to modulate the throttle a little bit as you come through that middle part of the chicane, that kind of that right into left, if you will. And the reason for that is because this car is really responsive to throttle input to help you rotate the car, as well as you want to be full throttle by the time you're out of that chicane in order to get the best run as possible. At this point, you'll be screaming down to the final hairpin, or the parabolica as they call it. Here you're going to want to brake at about the 75 or 60 board down to third gear and coast around the final hairpin here until you almost see that orange bit on the right hand side. That's when you can throttle up again, or at least until you can feel the car actually gripping the track. That is when you're going to know that you can go up to full throttle again. Now here's the problem with setting the fuel map to where it was at the beginning of the race that I alluded to earlier in the video. As you can see, I have enough fuel for 1.7 laps, however, I do need to go 2 laps around this track, for lap 9 and for lap 10. So what we're going to need to do is save a little bit of fuel here. Luckily, we're 20 seconds plus ahead of P2, so there's not really much that can take away from us in terms of winning this race other than us making a very kind of disastrous or catastrophic mistake. And the way that I like to employ fuel saving, if you know from the last video, is to coast a bit into braking zones rather than being full throttle here. I did not employ this for the first part of this lap because I did want to see exactly how much fuel drain there is when on fuel map 6, because so far in this race the fuel map was set to 4 and the game's calculation has been calculating based on fuel map 4 for the rest of the race. Since we know that on fuel map 4 we're going to run out of fuel, we don't quite know what the average is so far between 4 and 6. or what this lap is going to be so far on just 6. However, you can see now I'm down to 1.2, and I know for a fact that there's not 0.2 laps remaining on this track. It's probably more of a 0.3 or 0.4. So as you saw there, I did start employing the coasting into the braking zone. Another thing you'll see me do on this straight eventually is to actually go about half throttle instead of full throttle. This also helps with fuel usage while keeping speed in an acceptable range to not completely throw the lead away. One thing to mention about coasting into the braking zones, however, is you're going to need to move that braking zone slightly further instead of braking at where you normally would. Because you're not going as fast into the braking zone, you don't have as much momentum to brake as you would if you were full throttle there. You could see that on the final corner, I braked at the 50 board instead of at the 75 board or so. Despite the potential danger of running out of fuel for the rest of the race, you can see here we are able to cross the line not only in first place still, but also with some fuel remaining. The fuel saving does work when employed correctly without compromising the entirety of the race. With the normal race out of the way, I did want to try the same strategy on the hard setting. There were a few comments on the last guide that mentioned that a lot of the strategies and a lot of the settings did not work on the hard difficulty. So this time around, I wanted to make sure that I was improving my content a little bit and making sure to not leave out those who were trying this on the hard difficulty. I also wanted to try to improve on the strategy from the last race, where I started with the fuel map 4 for the most of the race and then ended up almost running out of fuel. For this race, I wanted to try fuel map 5 for at least a majority of the race to see how that fuel usage worked for this track and this car combo. However, if you do try to attempt this particular setup with this particular strategy on hard difficulty, you're going to be in for quite the uphill battle. The reason is because you're so far down on power compared to the rest of the field, you really have to take advantage of the minimal cornering that this track has to offer. You can see here that on that last right-hander, I have an incredible run against the AI because I was blazingly fast through there. However, I'm unable to really take advantage of that because they have such straight line speed, as well as they try to kill you at any chance they get. But this is another example of just how much straight line speed the AI is going to have compared to you. I essentially cut that last part of the chicane, and by the end of this straight, they are still both ahead of me. No matter what you do, they are going to have a lot more straight line speed than you. This can get rather frustrating when you're trying your all to get ahead, and then on the last straight they just kind of pass you. However, if you take advantage of the straights and the slipstream on the straights, as well as be super aggressive in the corners, as you can see right here, you can make your way up the field and you are able to get the challenge done with this setup and this strategy. It's just not the prettiest way to do it, and I wouldn't say this is really the optimal way to do that either. However, if you're looking for a fun challenge or a way to help improve your cornering ability, I do say give this a shot, because in the end, it will actually help you improve your cornering ability if you stick with it and if you're proven to be fast enough to hang with the AI here. As we come towards the last bit of this race here, you can see I'm kind of catching P2, but also kind of not until we hit the final hairpin. At that moment, you can see I'm really trying to push to get past him to see if I can just squeeze out in front of him, but I just can't because of that straight line speed here. I have to settle for P3 on this one, so while good enough to complete the challenge, if you're really looking for something to help you complete the challenge, I wouldn't say this is going to be the surefire way of winning this race, at least on hard. As you can see here, we're almost 5 seconds slower than P1, so we do need to come up with a faster strategy to help catch up. That is where race number 3 comes into play. For this race, I wanted to try a 1 pit stop strategy because if we can push hard enough and not have to worry about conserving fuel for the entire race, we don't need to put ourselves at a disadvantage down on power for the entirety of the race. We can instead try and push out as many laps as possible with as much power as possible to gain as much speed as possible to hopefully jump the rest of the field. And as you can see already, how fast we are catching up to P19 here instead of the last race, which took us probably half a lap or more just to be able to catch up. Now we are a little bit too efficient at catching up here, completely slamming into the back of the AI ahead of us going into that chicane. Once we get past, however, it's racing as normal. The big thing to note about this strategy in particular when you're on fuel map 1 is you actually don't need to worry too much about losing the straight line battle to a lot of the AI. There might be a couple of cars out there that are going to be faster than you on a straight line, but for the most part, most of them are no longer faster than you there. So that grants you the advantage of keeping up with them in a straight line, as well as being able to blaze past them in the corners. A prime example of this is P15 right in front of us. You're going to notice that we are going to slowly catch him up to a certain point, and then he's going to start to pull away a little bit. However, the point at which he pulls away is not going to come soon enough for him before the braking zone, which is where we really catch up the rest of that distance. Like I said, be aggressive in the corners. Now for this lap here, I did want to showcase my best lap again so we can compare it to the one from the no stop strategy. And for the most part, a lot of the stuff stays the same. We're still braking at the 100 board coming into the T1 or into the first chicane. Not much is going to change thereafter. It's just mostly the speed at which you're coming in and how fast you can actually slow down. You still want to focus on being as smooth as possible through the first chicane, as well as holding off on the power until you're already through that last corner. If you come onto the power too fast, you're going to do what the guy in front of us did, which is lose the back end. Now for the second chicane, you're going to want to be braking at the 100 board again, coming down to second gear to get through the chicane, making sure that you get a good exit on that last corner. Coming into the next right, braking at the 50 board, going down to third gear, coasting around the corner, and then hammering on as soon as you can. Same strategy for the next right-hander here. You want to brake at the 50 board, down to third gear, and then hammer on as soon as you get the opportunity to. Unlike me, however, you're going to want to cut it a lot closer to the curb at the apex, which will allow you to rotate faster and get a lot better of a run than I did here. Not that it makes a huge difference, but it can. Coming into the next chicane, you're going to want to be braking at the 100 board again, down to third gear, making sure that you're still doing a little bit of throttle modulation around the middle part or second half of that chicane. Allows you to get the car rotated and a lot better run on this straight here. As we approach the parabolica, you're going to want to brake at the correct 75 board for this one, down to third gear, kind of coast around a little bit until you're able to get the car under control. Hammer on, that will allow you to actually get a good run onto this extremely long straight. I think the front straight is longer than the back straight, so this is really key to getting a good lap time and getting a good run. Otherwise, you're going to be down on max speed. Jumping forward a little bit further in this race, you can see that all of the racers in front of us actually did pit at the same time. Now with our pit strategy, we're going to be doing what's called an overcut as opposed to an undercut. For those that don't know, an undercut is where you pull into the pit stop ahead of everybody else so you don't have to do it later, and an overcut is you do it later than everybody else for the same effect. There's a whole debate as to whether or not you should under or overcut and in what situations here, but in our case, the reason why it became an overcut was simply because we ran out of fuel one lap later than everybody else, so don't think too hard into it. For the pit stop strategy, it's really simple. You basically don't change your tires, as we've seen from the last two races that they're going to last without a problem. And what you're going to do is basically just fill up your fuel to the level that you're comfortable with. As per normal, I fill mine to about a half lap more than what the marker says we're going to need, since then I know for sure that I'm going to have enough and that any sort of minor miscalculations or anything like that that the game might have are going to be resolved that way. It's probably more of a paranoia kind of strategy than anything else, but I like to do that and I'm not going to suffer too many consequences from it. After your pit stop, you might be jumped by a few AI that came around. That's fine, that's normal. With this strategy, you're going to have a few laps to be able to hunt them down and pass them. Or in this situation, there might be one or two that actually still need to pit doing their own overcuts. So if that's the case, just race as normal and you should naturally pass them. Once that is all said and done, it's basically just closing out the race as per usual. You can see here we do end up making the pass on P1 with about a lap and a half to go, so we're just going to essentially close this out. Try our best to be able to distance ourselves from them, especially around this chicane here. You're going to be able to see that there's a massive gain from this particular chicane. I'm not sure why that's the case, but the AI seems to love to slow down a whole lot before going around there. As you can see, being about a second, 1.2, 1.5 seconds ahead of P2, just coming out of that one chicane alone. Then it's just essentially repeating that for the next lap. And as we come around the final time here onto the straight towards the line, you're going to see that we are now 5 seconds ahead of P2. tons of space and tons of distance between us. So we went from being 5 seconds slower than P1 to being 5 seconds faster than P2 for this race. As you can see here, about 5, almost 6 seconds faster. So obviously the one stop is going to be the recommended way of doing this race from my end. You can still make it work to complete the challenge on the no pit stop on hard, but I would definitely not recommend it for if you're trying to win the race this week to have a complete sweep of week wins. I would, however, recommend it on the easy or normal race difficulties just because there's a lot more time to play with and a lot less complexity if you take the pit stop out of the race without having to worry, are you going to be jumped by the AI or are you going to jump the AI, and figuring out what lap is optimal or whatever else can possibly go wrong there. Just completely remove it and win the race as you need to. That being said, that's pretty much everything I wanted to share today. Thank you so much. If you've made it this far into the video, you are a lifesaver. I really do appreciate you guys watching the content, and if you're enjoying it, please leave a thumbs up and consider hitting the subscribe button. If you're not enjoying it, let me know down below why you're not and what sort of improvements I could be making to the content. I am always looking to improve my content, so any constructive criticism you've got, I would be happy to hear. Also, while you're down there, let me know what car you did this challenge in, if you've completed it, or where things are going wrong for you. We may be able to help you in more of a community setting with everybody pitching in their own tips and tricks and improvement points that you could be making, so don't be shy for asking help down below. I will also be reading those comments, as I do read every single comment, so know that there are eyes on your comment. Other than that, I will thank you once again for finding my little slice of internet. You could be anywhere, but I appreciate you being here. Links down below to my social media as well as Discord server if you want to join. I've been rambling on long enough. You guys have been awesome. I've been Cyber Fury. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.